Edward Brown, host of the Best of Investing, here to remind you to tune in this week on Saturday at 8 p.m. Our guest is going to be Eddie Speed. You're not going to want to miss this show. That's the Best of Investing on Saturday at 8 p.m. Welcome. You're listening to The Best of Investing. I'm your host, Edward Brown. Our phone number is 888-912-1190. Use that number to answer the trivia questions for a 5-pack tanning certificate given away during this show. That certificate's not sponsored by the radio station, but by Tan Bella Tanning Salon with 2 locations in San Francisco and 1 in Marin. Today's trivia theme, miscellaneous trivia. We do have a special guest, Blair LaCorte, and I'm going to give a nice little bio of here. He's the company, the Buck Institute, which is very familiar with us here in the Bay Area. Blair is a serial entrepreneur, author of upcoming book of Relevance and Relationships, and a future astronaut. Yeah, I gotta ask you about that one. Okay, former board member of Positive Coaching Alliance. And let's see here. He's a seasoned business executive, transformational leader with a diverse career spanning multiple industries, including entertainment, aviation, artificial intelligence, technology development, aerospace and defense, supply chain management. He's held executive roles at various business stages, from startups to growth phases, and from restructuring to liquidity events, including sales, mergers, and IPOs. Blair has led companies to significant growth and investor returns. He has been an active investor and advisor to over 100 companies and nonprofit organizations like the Buck Institute. Additionally, he served as a national board member for several positive coaching organizations. Blair earned his MBA from Dartmouth's Tuck School of Business. I know that one. And he's also completed executive coursework in human capital and organizational behavior at Stanford University. Blair, that's a mouthful. How are you?
I'm Edward. Now I feel much better with that introduction. How can I feel better? I feel great.
All right. Well, let's get into it. Let's talk about leadership and entrepreneurship. And you got quite an extensive background. I know the audience would like to hear more.
Sure. You asked me when you asked me to come on the show to just kind of give you my opinion. So I'm gonna say beforehand that my opinions are probably worth what you paid for it, but I'll give them to you anyway. I'm not a big fan of the term leadership, because I think it's a very generic term, and I think when you pick a generic term, everyone wants to give you 5 points on it. I am a huge believer in people who actually lead people, because I think at the end of the day, this is my opinion, is that what I've found at my advanced age is that life is about your family, and it's about your relationships, and it's about your passions, and business is a sport. Now, hopefully you can find, you play your sport. Hopefully you find that, your friends and your passions overlap in that. But at the end of the day, there's 50% of the world who live in subsistence, that don't get to decide what they do other than to try to find food every day. 80% of the world doesn't get a chance to decide what they do. They have a job and they live paycheck to paycheck. And so for those of us in the 20% or entrepreneurs, we just took the chance. We do get to make decisions on the sport, and we better have fun with it. That's my attitude. So leadership depends on who you are, where you are, what point of your life it is, and what the company needs. Because the only 2 things I think that all the companies I've worked at have in common is that there's business patterns, and you should pay attention to them, and then there's people. So those are the two things.
Well, like you said, most people, they have a job, not so much a career. And And to me, it's like people ask about retirement. I say, to me, retirement is working because you want to work, not because you have to work.
I think that's actually great. I'm going to use that one, because when you say the word retirement, the problem is it has a connotation of that you're done. You're not going to be passionate. Maybe you're going to be passionate about golf. And if I don't say I'm retired, and they say, what are you doing next? Which stresses me out. So I've got to figure out, there's something in the middle of those.
We got to be doing something in this world, be productive. All right, we're going to cut to our first commercial break. We're talking the trivia theme is miscellaneous trivia here. And just as a reminder to our guest, Blair, if you know the answer, don't say anything till we get right back. Who was the first U.S. president to appear on TV? Call 888-912-1190. The first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate, which, by the way, is worth about $100. That's a nice little gift. Who was the first U.S. president to appear on TV? I want to make a mention here also for the Transcendence Theater Broadway holiday show, December 18th and 19th at the Sebastiani Theater in Sonoma. Check them out, bestnightever.org. Stay with us. The Best of Investing. I'll be right back. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Blair LaCorte. Our first trivia question, who was the first U.S. president to appear on TV? Blair, what do you think? You know the answer to that one?
Wow. I think I want to say, was it Nixon?
No, actually FDR.
Oh, it was FDR that far back?
FDR, the first one to appear on TV. Yeah, very interesting.
Well, they all
right.
appear on TV today. And, and the ones that, that just got elected has a very good tan. So there seems to be an overlap between your trivia question and your prize.
That's right. Yes, they call him Orange Man for a reason. So, Blair, you know what? Let's kind of actually want to get into the Buck Institute because I noticed that on your resume here. How'd you get involved with the Buck Institute?
Well, the real story is that I was courting a young lady that was into longevity and health. And we were driving by one day. For those of you who don't know what the Buck Institute is, the Buck Institute is an institute that was founded by the Marin Community Foundation. And it became 30 years ago, the first longevity and aging institute. Back then they had to invent a word for it. They didn't know what to call it. And they called it geroscience, right? So they kind of coined the term. So it's this building up on a hill as you're driving down the highway, and it's on 500 or 600 acres. It's beautiful. And it was designed by I.M. Pei, who donated his architectural brilliance to build it. But as you drive by it, for people of a certain age, they'll get this reference. It looks like that building from the movie Coma, where they were storing people and harvesting their organs, and it was a horror.
Yeah.
Because you look up there, you think, what is that thing? There's no signs. It looks very futuristic, and but no, it is actually a real institute, and it's actually one of the most sophisticated places. If you live in the San Francisco area, I would say sign up for a tour. It will not disappoint. So the Buck Institute is focused. It was the first institute. In the last 5 years, there's been a couple more academic organizations who have done this, but it was not focused on disease itself. It was focused on why we age. And so I will give you the answer, the assumptive close to this is that what we found over the last 30 years, which everyone actually agrees with, is that some very simple facts. One is that about 7% of your aging is going to be genetic, and 93% is going to be how your genes actually express themselves, which means, unfortunately, that it's how we live our lives, right? Yeah. Of the 7%, because I know people of my age were afraid of getting their genetic test done, only less than 100th of 1% you'll ever find anything that's really bad that you'd have to go in and fix. The rest of it is just, it's almost like an operating manual. Like I used to be in the live entertainment business, right? These are the notes. They're not the melody. They're not the song. It's not what you copy. It's, these are just the notes that you put together into a song. So for instance, I had my genetic test done, and there's 120 million anonymized records today. So they have a tremendous amount of information comes from that $250 test. Now, just to, look backwards, that first test was $3 billion for the first person. It's $250 now. They match it against the records, and then they can give you a predictive index. So for instance, for me, it turns out that unfortunately my ancestors processed sugar into simple sugars, which meant I was probably being chased by animals and getting beaten up, and we needed energy very quickly. So we do not process them, into a more sophisticated, where simple things that the energy can be used very quickly, which means they all go to fat if we don't do enough, right? Gotcha. So that tells me that when I eat sugar, I have to be very careful about it, because ultimately I'll drive myself to diabetes. But if so that's the first thing, is that, the majority is really how you live. The second thing is that if you look at Americans' longevity, we're only 39th in the world. for longevity. We're behind Cuba, which may surprise you.
That does surprise
But
me.
worse than that, we are number one in the world in one statistic, and the statistic is dying slowly. So Americans die 14 years before they die. We die very, very slowly. Now, if you were, one of those genetically gifted people who lived in a blue zone, who was doing, many of the right things, you really live to between 90 and 95, but you only really deteriorate in the last year. That's what we all wish for. We're going to
That's the best way to
let's
go.
go. Let's go in
Yeah.
bed having sex. Let's go fast. Or if I'm gonna deteriorate and I need to talk to some people before I go,
Oh,
make
yeah.
it short, right?
Gotcha, yeah.
Americans deteriorate for the last 14 years of their life. So
Wow.
if you look at the average blended age for an American longevity today is 73, right around 60, we start to deteriorate. And what we mean by deteriorate is chronic illness, right? 100 years ago, the reason we invented the drugs that we did and the antibiotics and things like that was because the majority of people were dying of acute illness, and the majority of children were dying before the age of 5. So we spent a lot of time trying to figure out antibiotics and vaccines and things like that. And we also got sophisticated about surgery, and we did a wonderful job. So after the break, I'll come back and tell you the third thing.
Gotcha. And I did that genetic test, and it said I was hatched rather than born. So I go, this is not good. I got to go back to the drawing board on that. And by the way, I remembered the name. It was Tom Peters.
Okay, yeah.
Oh,
I didn't know him, but I know the name.
Yeah, really super, super nice guy. All right, here is our second trivia question here. This one also happens to be a presidential question. It's interesting because we just happen to be talking about early dying which president served the shortest term in office? Call 888-912-1190. The first caller with the correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Again, which is worth about $100. Which president served the shortest term in office? Again, call 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate. And again, check out bestnightever.org. I got to say that I've been to a number of Transcendence Theater performances, and they do a phenomenal job. It's like going to Broadway. All right, stay with us. The Best of Investing will be right back. Don't touch that dial. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. I'm Edward Brown, along with my special guest, Blair LaCorte. And second trivia question, which president served the shortest term in office? Do you know the answer to that, Blair?
The only reason I know the answer to this is because we looked this up when we were naming our third son, where I have Connor and Kincaid and Aiden, but Aiden was going to be Harrison. And I had to actually think to myself that I think Harrison was the shortest term.
Yeah, and there's two. There's Benjamin Harrison, but yeah, William Henry Harrison. Interesting. I have a good friend / cousin he has two of his kids named Connor and Aiden, and then he's got a couple of other kids too. Very interesting. Okay, yeah. So first of all, it was only 32 days that he served. He was the first president to die in office in 1841 after serving basically a month. And he succumbed to pneumonia after giving a 2-hour inaugural address in wet, freezing weather without a jacket, hat, or gloves. He should have listened to his mom. I mean, I don't know if he was trying to be Mr. Macho or whatever, but yeah, that didn't work out for him too well. And Blair, before we get into what we were talking about, I want to kind of mention here, because sometimes I wait till the end to talk about it. But so I've been working with Pacific Private Money for a number of years. So far, so good. Nobody's ever lost money. We've done a couple of $1 billion worth of loans. We have a few different funds. And the funds pay anywhere from a low of 7% up to around 10%. They just came out with a new fund literally last week. Minimum investment's $100,000. You have to be an accredited investor, so you have to be worth at least $1 million exclusive of your home, or make $200,000 a year if you're single, $300,000 if you're married. It does pay quarterly. It does have a 1-year lockup, but it's paying 10%. And the reason is because they're doing very, very short-term loans, and they're selling them every 2 weeks to an institution, and they have a contract for that. So they fund a loan, an 11, pretty much bridge loans, like 11-month bridge loans, and then they really don't even have a time to portfolio them for them to even potentially go into default, because they get them off the books within 2 weeks. And the reason that they can pay such a high yield is that they're partnering with an institution that only wants about an 8% return on their money. And so they, let's say if it's $1 million loan, Pacific Private Money's fund called the Arrival Fund puts in, let's say, 150,000. The institution puts in 850,000, and they're only charging 8% interest, and then they're charging the borrower 10.5, 11% plus a couple of points. The Arrival Fund gets to keep that, and then they flip it over to a new institution who is a buyer of the loans at roughly close to par, and so they can pay the clients a 10% interest rate. So it's really a nice little machine that they've kind of put together here. And for more information, you can go to pacificprivatemoney.com. Tell them you heard this ad on the Best of Investing, and I've just put some money in it myself. So hopefully that'll help things. In fact, the manager put in $750,000. So that kind of tells you they sort of believe in it. All right. So check them out, pacificprivatemoney.com. All right. So Blair LaCorte in the studio, i.e. via Zoom. And you were talking about the Buck Institute, but let's kind of move on. What are you doing nowadays?
Well, let me make one comment about the investment. Investment is all about cycles, which is what I learned in my investing days. So it is actually a very interesting time to arbitrage loans because they're, very difficult in the marketplace for banks, commercial banks to give loans. So if you can find a way to take a long-term, user of loans and arbitrage, finding a way to do it and syndicate it out. Cycles are, that's how you make money. You play the right side of the cycle.
Well, interestingly enough, but banks are just not, partly because of Dodd-Frank and other things going on in the market, they're just not making the loans that they used to. In fact, a client just talked to me, an investor client just talked to me before he got on the show, where he has Bank of America for a HELOC. His property's worth $3 million. It's free and clear. He had a $300,000 HELOC, and it's now coming due because it's 10 years. And the guy makes like $300,000 a year off investments and Social Security, et cetera, et cetera. And B of A basically just told him, we are not going to renew the $300,000 line of credit, but we are willing to give you $150,000. And thinking,
no, it's look, there's a lot. There's two places that it's a tough world. One is banks, and the other is insurance companies who aren't insuring anymore. Right.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of conservatism in both of those industries for the reasons you talked about. Some of it's regulation, some of it's economics, but in some of it's the consolidation because everyone's gotten bigger, and and when you get bigger, you make it up in volume. Right? You don't do any of the products. So,
and some of these insurance companies, they're because of the fires and all that, they're moving out. But it's going to happen eventually. It'll start coming back because they're realizing there's too much money to be made, especially with the premiums the way they are. And hopefully the premiums will come back down. All right, here's our next trivia question. This one has to do with music. What is the longest running major band without a lineup change? All right. Call 888-912-1190. This is a hard one. You'll have heard of the group. I'm pretty sure you'll have heard of the group. What is the longest running major band without a lineup change? 888-912-1190. First caller with correct answer wins that tanning certificate. Stay with us. The Best of Investing. Welcome back to the Best of Investing. One more time, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Blair LaCorte, which has been very kind of interesting talking about health and all this good business stuff. And we're going to ask about your crystal ball here because you're a wealth of knowledge. But our trivia question, what is the longest running major band without a lineup change? And now, I don't know if this will give you a hint because I never heard of them back in 1970. But this is since 1970, they have not had a major lineup without a lineup change. I mean,
I'm going to wild guess and say Fish, but
no, actually, ZZ Top.
That I would not have guessed.
I wouldn't. I know. I didn't even know they were around in 1970. I didn't hear about them until probably the 90s.
No. I remember them in the 80s.
Yep. Okay. All right. So, Blair, with your wealth of knowledge, let's talk, longevity and what does your crystal ball show, now that we've had
Yeah,
a
so I
administration
started
change coming up?
out with there's three things that are true: that your genetics aren't the determinant. It's your lifestyle, and that America is actually dying 14 years before they die, which is chronic
Yeah.
illnesses, all inflammation based illnesses. They used to
Yeah.
argue, does inflammation cause illness? Does illness cause inflammation? And they're both true. The problem
Hmm.
is inflammation isn't bad. It's when your body goes to attack something. When it stays too long, it's bad. So diabetes, Alzheimer's, heart disease, arthritis, all of them are inflammation, chronic inflammation
Okay, but
based.
hold on. Okay, so my wife and my mom used to talk about, all this processed sugar and, hey, do you know if there's preservatives in there? And, I'll just pick on Twinkies for a minute here.
Yeah.
Pinky, if you eat Twinkies, it's like the shelf life is 200 years. And I go, well, that's how I plan to live to be 200. They'll preserve my life for 200 years, I mean,
Put the preservatives in. Yeah,
yeah,
so you hit on the point. The conclusion out of this is, why do we have so many more chronic illnesses? Why are we dying slower, given that our genetics aren't telling us that we have to? And so the reality of it is that inflammation is caused in many cases by too much glucose and insulin resistance, which
yeah,
then starts to have a dysfunction. So when you look at if you look at the two reasons why we have more inflammation and therefore chronic illnesses, one of them is we hate Russians, right? And
yeah,
so in 1950, when we decided that the Russians weren't our friends, and this is all declassified, but the
yeah,
CIA went to the agricultural department and said, we need to encourage farmers to get more food because food is a weapon. If I can ship wheat, corn, and soy around the world, we can influence countries not to be friends with Russia, but to be friends with us. That's when they changed the triangle. That's when they added in more carbohydrates. Now, that was a plan, but it had unintended consequences. The unintended consequences is within the next 10 years, those farmers who were growing an awful lot of food, who became the most productive in the world,
yeah,
actually had extra food, and they started to push it out. So the average caloric
yeah,
intake went from 2,000 calories to 3,000. Majority
yeah,
of the gap was made up in carbohydrates. Carbohydrates actually, if you get too many of them, they're going to cause you to have too much sugar because they turn right
yeah,
to glucose.
yeah,
And so we started to get that, right? The second thing happened in the early 80s, which is the fight between big sugar and fat. Big sugar had a lot more money. The soda people and the candy people lobbied the Department of Agriculture not to count sugar as a calorie, but to say that that was bad. So you saw the chart change and it said, don't eat much fat. That's when we came out with no fat, low fat, all
yeah,
this stuff. The problem was a double whammy. Not only did we eat more sugar because it tasted good and it didn't say it was adding calories, but the second part is everything that they took the fat out of didn't taste good, so we injected
yeah,
sugar. So those two
yeah.
things have driven us to have way too much sugar, 73 pounds of sugar per person in the United States. The only thing I would say about it is, number one, we should try to eat sugars that are natural, right, that are in
Mhm.
full foods and not processed foods. But the other piece, is that at the end of the day, you need more muscle to absorb sugar. That's why people will tell
Yeah,
you live longer if you build more muscle,
yeah,
especially men and women over 50 years old. If you're
sure.
not lifting weights over 50
Yep.
years old, sugar is going to attack you twice as fast because your muscle mass goes down.
You know what?
Very
Very.
simple math.
My wife knows all that stuff, and she she's over 50, and literally right now she's lifting weights. I mean, she knows about how important it is to lift weights, and it's
It
interesting because
sounds
okay,
like
if I
it's
remember,
manly, right? But it's not.
yeah,
And she
yeah,
also told me she just wants to live longer than you, so she get all your money.
yeah,
But
exactly. So as I remember, like fat helps the brain, protein is for muscles, and carbohydrates are for energy. Is that right?
yes,
Yeah.
but
Hey, all
if
right.
you eat too many carbohydrates and they get processed right away, your
Yeah.
body, you're not doing anything. Carbohydrates aren't bad. Nothing is bad. Your body actually has a balance that it wants. Now, another trick is if you eat carbohydrates third. So, if you have protein before carbohydrates,
Yeah.
it's much more effective because it
Yeah.
slows down the transition to glucose.
Well, there's also, the cholesterol thing. I remember, hearing, and I've said this on the air before, that it's like, doctors sometimes say, well, your cholesterol should be kind of close to your weight. And when he told me my cholesterol was 600, I said, well, gee, I guess I have to gain 400 more
That's
pounds,
right.
make it even, right?
I can fix that. Well,
Yeah.
again, there's the third thing I was going to say is one is what's, it's health span versus, lifespan and your genetics, everything. But the third one is everyone is personalized, right? So when someone tells you your cholesterol is too high or too low, they don't know unless you look at your cholesterol over a number of years, because everyone has a system biology that you can be a little bit higher, but the other things around your body actually take
Yeah.
that and
Well,
use it.
there's the LDL, which is bad. The HDL is better, and
Right, but
cholesterol.
they're just rules of thumb, right?
Yeah.
Because the one thing you can tell, they did a study, I think it was in the 1960s, and they wanted to find the most beautiful American. Now we know that because the way the brain works, the most beautiful American is someone who has the most common features. That's the way you determine
Oh,
beauty through
okay.
your brain. So they went out and they tried to do it and found out there's no one that's normal. So
Huh. Yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Yeah, it's I don't know, and also with back to that cholesterol, it's like I remember the doctor asking me, he goes, well, your cholesterol's a little high, and I said, yeah, well, I can figure out why, and he says, but do you exercise? I said, yeah, I do, and he says, okay, well, for the most part, you probably don't have to worry about it because the cholesterol, all that buildup is really not building up; it's kind of going through your system as you're exercising it. Again, personalized situation, maybe mine's a little better. All right, stay with us. You're listening to the best of investing. Don't touch that dial. We're going to be right back with some closing comments. Welcome back to the best of investing. Last time for today, I'm Edward Brown, your host, along with my special guest, Blair LaCorte. Blair, you got some advice for our audience. Go ahead.
all right, so I'll try to do this fast because I know we have much time left. Look, there are things that everybody agrees with, and I can give you 10 things that if you do it, you're most likely to add 10 years of health span. I can't talk about longevity with these 10, but that quality of life, right?
Okay.
The first by far and the most important, it's a force multiplier, as we say in the military, of 10 times on every other factor. It's not even close. Is that humans are one of the only animal in the world that has a parasympathetic nervous system. And so the balancing of the body and the brain is the number one condition to actually having health, because your immune system is stronger. So having one dyadic relationship at any given time, someone who cares about you and is compassionate, which means you believe in your heart they would help you if you were in trouble, and having connection and purpose, number one, 10 times more than anything else. The other four, very simple. They're all personalized, but there are some commonalities. And the first one is fuel. What do you put in the machine? Number one for fuel is calorie restriction. If you go down 600 calories a day, you can live 10 years longer. You'll feel like it's 20 and you'll hate yourself. But intermittent fasting is a valuable tool for a lot of people because it reduces, if you don't eat breakfast or you eat dinner early, it reduces the window, and so you eat less calories, and it gives your body more chance to process things. The second is cut down on processed foods. Processed foods are poison. It's not just the fats when they're heated up; it's the amount of sugar. So fuel, two easy things to do. Easy, right? Number two is how the movement of the machine. It's not exercise. Humans weren't designed to exercise. We've been in starvation for thousands of years. Our body is designed to, the reason we have to use muscle confusion in the gym, because we do things more and more, we use less calories, right? So it's not exercise. If you move 15 minutes every hour, which means the toxins don't sit in your organs, in your joints, it's better to move 15 minutes every hour than it is to exercise 2 hours a day. And then muscle mass, which we talked about, right? Maintenance. There's two types of maintenance. One is touch. Okay, you got to be touched because your body actually responds to that. The second is sleep. It's not just the number of hours. More important than the number of hours is, when does your maintenance crew come in? If you go to bed at the same time on your chronotype 5 days a week, it's more important than the number of hours because it gives you 20% more efficiency. So you look at, you figure out when you should go to bed. You set the alarm. You go to bed at 10 o'clock. It's not when you get up. It's when you go to bed. And the final thing is your environment. We all talk about smoking and pollution, but the biggest organ in your body is your skin. So if you use washer liquids that have aromas and chemicals in them, They've never been tested. Out of 72,000 chemicals in the US, none of them have been tested for long-term usage every single day on your clothes.
Oh, wow.
The other is dryer sheets, which are poison. Basically, the lotion comes off, which makes you feel like the things are softer. Anyone who uses dryer sheets, the chances are, if they're not natural, that you're poisoning your body through your skin. The last one is what you put in your mouth and dishwashing liquid and rinse liquid. So
Wow.
those are simple things you can do. You do those things, pretty good chance you'll add 10 years of healthy lifespan.
Blair LaCorte, thank you. Good advice. I really like that. Okay, you ready? First of all, here's our silly joke of the week. So a guy joins a monastery and takes a vow of silence. He's able to say only 2 words every 7 years. After the first 7 years, the elders bring him in and ask for his 2 words. He says, "Cold floors." They nod, send him away. 7 more years pass. They bring him back and ask for 2 more words. And he clears his throat and says, "Bad food." They nod and send him away. 7 more years pass. They bring him in for his 2 words. He says, "I quit." And they said, the elder said, "Yeah, that's not surprising. You've done nothing but complain since you got here." All right. Here's our thoughts for the day. So if you can smile when things go wrong, you have someone in mind to blame. And laziness is nothing more than the habit of resting before you get tired. Yeah, I could deal with that. All right, audience, tune in next week to The Best of Investing. We're going to be giving away more free prizes for answering trivia questions. Thanks for listening. On behalf of our team, I'm Edward Brown, wishing you the best of investing. So long.